I can hardly stop thinking about the first time I took an Uber. And not because it was a great experience, quite the opposite in fact. It was actually quite scary. I had just finished an 11-hour shift and had slept almost nothing the night before. If I had had my car, I probably wouldn't have wanted to drive either, as tired as I was. But anyway, it was in the workshop with a brake problem, so I had no choice but to try to get home another way. Normally I would take a taxi, but that day not a single one stopped. And my friends always talked about Uber as if it were the eighth wonder of the world, so I decided to give it a try. The truth is that my first impression was good. The car arrived quite quickly. However, I noticed that it didn't have license plates on the back, but I didn't think too much about it because honestly, at that moment, I wasn't in a position to think much. I was fainting with tiredness, so I got in without thinking. At least I saw that the inside of the car was clean and tidy. Nothing like the taxis I used to take. The driver was a guy who seemed quite serious and didn't even look at me. He just remained silent for a long time, without moving the car, which made me wonder if I was really in the right car or if I had taken the wrong Uber. When I finally spoke, the car started to move, and so I let myself be carried along a bit, thinking that maybe it was just waiting to get into traffic. The last image I remember is the busy city behind the window as I fell into a deep sleep. Suddenly, a bump woke me up. The car had hit a pothole and I had crashed into the window, and I quickly realized something strange. It was darker than normal. It was barely 3 in the afternoon and it should be lighter, but when I looked out of the window, I realized that we were on a lonely road surrounded by a very dense forest. A road I didn't know, and I started to worry. I didn't live anywhere like this. It was then that I felt that uncomfortable feeling that someone was watching me, and I immediately turned to my side, and although at first it seemed that the seat was empty, I soon realized that there was someone else there. It looked like a thin shadow, almost like a skeleton. Its eyes were huge and shone with the light from the dashboard. The way this person was looking at me was chilling, so much so that for a moment I thought I might be dreaming. "Are we near my house?" I asked him, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was racing. But the guy didn't answer me. He just continued to look at me in that horrible way without saying a word. For a moment, his gaze made me feel that something was not right, but what he said next gave me chills. "He has other plans for you, a new destination. We're almost there." That guy hadn't blinked once since I woke up, and the way he was looking at me gave me chills. But the words he said to me echoed in my head like a terrifying echo. What did he mean by new destination? Adrenaline began to pump through my veins in bursts after those words, and I knew I needed to get out of that car as soon as possible. I started to look around desperately, trying to find a way out, but the dark forest seemed to close in around us, and I had no idea where I was. All I wanted was to get home. But right now that seemed easier said than done, and panic was taking hold of me. I felt as if the world was getting smaller and smaller, and the presence at my side was becoming more and more oppressive. What was going to happen next? The car was going at almost 160 kilometers per h, and every bump in the road made my heart skip a beat. I felt like I was in a horror movie, and in my mind I kept thinking about how I was going to get out of this situation. The idea of jumping out of the car crossed my mind, but just imagining it terrified me. If I threw myself out of the car at that speed, I would most likely die. In the best case scenario, I would end up with multiple fractures, so that wasn't the best option, although I didn't rule it out completely as a last resort. But I knew I had to do something. Could we make a quick stop? I need to use the bathroom, I said, hoping that they would pay attention and hopefully let me get out of the car. But the two men simply remained silent, as if they hadn't even heard. A couple of minutes later, however, the guy behind the wheel finally broke the silence and his voice boomed in the car. "The others will welcome you once this is over." That sentence gave me goosebumps. Who were the others? Where were these guys taking me, and what did they want to do with me? At that moment, a car sped by, and the bright lights illuminated the interior of the vehicle for an instant. This was enough to make me realize that something was really wrong. Next to me, the guy had a face full of fresh stitches as if someone had forcibly repaired him, and his eyes were so wide open that it seemed like he had never closed them in his life. The sight was so grotesque that I could hardly keep my eyes on him. I thought about how strange the paths of life worked to lead me to such a situation. "You came to us for a reason. He'll be delighted to meet you," said the man next to me, his voice trailing off as if he enjoyed what he was saying, as he began to stroke my hair with his hard, dry fingers. My body trembled, unable to process what was happening. But suddenly, I heard sirens. My heart swelled with that sound. For the first time since I woke up in that nightmarish car, I felt I had a chance of escaping from those psychopaths. The patrol car stopped, and soon an officer approached and asked the driver, "Do you know why I stopped you?" At that moment, I felt something sharp pressed against my ribs, and I didn't need to be a fortune teller to know what it was. I turned to look at the man next to me, and he gestured for me to be quiet. At that moment, the man behind the wheel replied to the policeman in a monotone, "No, sir, I don't know why you're stopping me." The officer looked at the driver with disdain and said, "You were driving at almost 80 kilometers over the speed limit. It's crazy, especially at night, and your headlights are burnt out. This is a disaster, my friend. All wrong." As he spoke, the policeman came closer to the car and glanced at the back, and when his eyes met mine, I felt I could convey my fear to him. Then his gaze turned serious and he turned his attention to me. "Hey you, I think I recognize you. There's an arrest warrant out for you," said the officer, and terror washed over me. The men around me didn't seem to realize the situation, but the officer opened the passenger door, pulled me out of the car, and started handcuffing me. I almost screamed at that moment, but I held back. While the policeman handcuffed me, the two guys remained silent. Although I felt relieved to finally be out of that car, I still didn't feel completely safe. My heart was in my throat, thinking that if those two madmen decided to act, there would be nothing I could do. I didn't know if the guys were armed and might try to attack the policeman or me. After all, there were two of them. I also didn't know if the officer was really trying to help me, or if it was another trap, or if maybe he was confusing me with some criminal. I didn't know anything. I just knew that I wanted to get away from that place and those guys as soon as possible. The officer, noticing my state, said to me in a low voice as he took me to the patrol car, "I know you need help. I'm a cop. I can see the anguish in your eyes from a distance. I see it every day." At that moment, the tears came out. All the fear and tension of the night overflowed. The policeman was silent during the trip, but he wasn't annoyed. He just let me cry, and suddenly, he even offered to take me home and stay a while in case they came back, and of course I accepted, although I knew it was going to be difficult to sleep that night. That night was one of the most difficult of my life. The trauma of what happened haunted me for months, and it took me more than 3 years to get back in an Uber. The guys never came back, and I never found out who they were or what they wanted. I didn't even want to imagine what would have happened if that infernal car hadn't been stopped by that good officer, who was my guardian angel that night. I just hope I never run into that pair of lunatics again. Hi, my name is Simon. When I was 45, everything in my life fell apart. I lost my job at the university where I had been a professor for 20 years, but that was just one of many problems I had at the time. I was in an unhappy marriage, where my wife and I couldn't stand each other, and I had a 20-year-old daughter who had become a complete headache. She was leading a disastrous life. She spent half her time away from home. She had more boyfriends than I could remember. She had problems with alcohol and had started taking medication. And I also suspected that she was dealing with some kind of illness, perhaps HIV. She had always been a beautiful girl, which made it easier for her to get money from others. Anyway, all these things led to a complicated divorce, and I had to leave the family home and move out on my own. But to be honest, when I left those two women behind, my ex-wife and my daughter, I really didn't care. I hated to see my family fall apart, but I didn't want anything more to do with them for my own mental health. At that point in my life, I had to rethink everything. I needed a place to live and a new job. Luckily, I had enough savings to rent a decent apartment, and I decided to try my luck as an Uber driver. Of course, I could have looked for a job that paid more, but my head was somewhere else. I felt like a ship adrift, and I thought that driving, going to different places, and meeting new people could be a good way to distract myself. Besides, I had always loved driving. For me, it was like anti-stress therapy. The first few weeks were a mixture of nervousness and fun. There was a kind of adrenaline in it that I loved. I took all kinds of passengers to their destinations, from the boring to the completely drunk or angry, although some turned out to be very interesting. However, there was something I particularly liked: beautiful women, especially when they were alone or with friends. Everything was going relatively well until after a month of working for Uber, something happened to me that was not at all nice. On one of my routes, I picked up a young guy. He couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He looked disturbing. He was shaking and drenched in sweat. He had long blonde hair that covered his face. "Hey mate, are you okay?" I asked the guy, worried not only about his condition but also about whether he was going to be able to pay for the ride. Besides, I didn't want him to throw up in my car. "Are you okay, mate? Have you got enough money?" I blurted out, trying to sound casual. "Yes, everything's fine. I just feel a bit sick, but I can pay," he replied. His tone made me think he just needed his daily dose of some drug, so I didn't think much of it. Finally, we arrived at his destination, an old house on a dark and lonely street. When he got out of the car, he paid me, just as he said, so I turned around and set off to continue with my night. But as I was driving back, I saw a woman lying on a lonely sidewalk in that horrible neighborhood. I thought that maybe she was drunk or high on drugs, but I realized that she was a young girl, and the position she was in was a bit dangerous, as she had almost half her body outside the sidewalk and her right arm was stretched out in such a way that any car that passed close to the sidewalk could hit her. The truth is that I felt a little bad for her, so I decided to approach to see if she needed help. I stopped a little further on, got out of the car and approached, although I didn't even know if she was alive or dead. I remember my subconscious made a connection with my daughter. I imagined that she could end up in a similar situation one day, and it broke my heart. "Hello, do you need help? It's not safe to be lying here in the street," I said, moving closer, but the woman didn't move at all, so I decided to touch her to see if she was breathing. To my surprise, she finally reacted. "Hey, get away from me, this is a free country," she spat at me. She was really young, or at least I thought so. She was very thin, with dark, dull eyes that matched her tangled hair. "Hi, my name is Larry. Let me help you, girl, this is no life. How old are you? Do you want me to call your family?" I said without thinking too much, and I felt it was the right thing to do. "I'm old enough to be your daughter, and I'm off duty tonight, so save your fantasies for another time," she replied. "I don't want anything to do with you, girl. I really want to help you. I can take you to a shelter if you want," I insisted. "I heard you the first time, Larry. I'm just a drug addict. I'm not deaf, and I'm not hungry either, so unless you want to give me a lot of money, get lost." At that moment, I felt a kind of epiphany. The truth came to me. This girl was lost. It was as if there was no going back for her. There was only one way out, and that pain could free her from her misery. "Hey, why are you looking at me like that? Why are you crying? Are you crazy, man? Get away!" she yelled at me. But at that moment, it was as if a dark impulse took hold of me. With tears in my eyes and a repulsive feeling in my chest, I grabbed her by the neck with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. Her eyes opened wide, and confusion was reflected on her face as I strangled her. It was quick enough so that she didn't suffer too much, and it didn't cost me any effort. Once it was done, I felt incredibly relieved and convinced myself that she would be too. Then I hid the body behind some nearby bushes. My turn to drive wasn't over yet, but I didn't want to leave the matter uncleaned up. 2 hours later, I had finished my work and decided to go back for the girl. The darkness of the night was upon me, and no one had seen us. And even if someone had looked, who would have cared? So I covered the girl's body with a large blanket and took her to my apartment. The building where I lived had its own garage, so I was able to move her without arousing suspicion. It was almost midnight, and being a professor of forensic medicine, I knew what was needed to dissect and embalm a body. So that is exactly what I did in the days that followed. I removed the organs that would probably rot quickly, but I kept the eyes, skin, and hair, preserving them with chemicals. I did a good job. She looked more alive than ever. I even found an ID in her pocket. Her name was Ariadna, and she was only 19 years old. Now she was safe at home, in a cold and secret room that I had prepared for her. There she would be, safe and at peace, forever. It was another night of work, and not that I was thrilled to be doing it, but my rent was 2 weeks overdue, and I had spent what I had on new tires and an oil change for the car. I knew I had no excuse for the landlord who had warned me last month, "If you're late again, you're out on the street." As you can imagine, he wasn't very understanding. So there I was, driving through the night, picking up all kinds of people. Young people, workaholics, and drunks just for the miserable wage that Uber paid me. But I could afford to lose my job. Since moving to this quiet coastal town a few months ago, I had no family or friends to turn to. To be honest, I hated driving at night, because I would pass by the water, and there was something disturbing about all that mist covering the sky. Just imagine driving over a fog-shrouded bridge. It was one of those moments when you wouldn't dare look in the rearview mirror. That night, I had just dropped off a couple of drunk people at a bar when I received a new request. Seeing it on my phone, I thought it would be quick, but not at all exciting. Probably just another person leaving a bar or something similar. As I drove to pick up this new passenger, I noticed that I was going exactly where I had left the couple only half an hour before. It didn't seem very strange at the time, just a strange coincidence. But as I got closer, I felt like there was an extra layer of fog that made my hair stand on end. So I decided to honk the horn to see if anyone would appear, but I saw nothing. I looked again at the pickup location on my phone and everything seemed correct. Suddenly, the back door on the driver's side opened with a bang, and my heart skipped a beat. Hello?" I said, a little scared. I tried to laugh to relax, although I had a lump in my throat. The guy who had come in was big and didn't say anything. He just sat down and started looking straight ahead, holding a brown paper bag pressed against his side. "Do you want me to drop you off just 1 block from here?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "There seems to be a mistake. I just want to make sure there isn't," I said. Finally, the guy spoke, and in a low, rough voice he said, "It must be a mistake." He paused, as if he was going to say something else, but then just went on. "I'm a friend of the couple you were just talking to." I was surprised by his answer. "Really?" I replied automatically. "Yes, they just wanted to go separately," he said matter-of-factly. Then I remembered that they were kissing before getting out, so well, it made sense that they would want to travel the road separately. Even so, everything felt weird, but I admit I was too scared to question anything. I entered their address into the GPS and started the car. And every so often I would look back, not because I was nervous, but because the brown bag caught my attention. I wondered if there was something fun in it, like beers or sandwiches or maybe weed. Who knows? The guy had a very serious face and, well, you know what the saying goes. Although I was also worried that there might be a weapon inside. As my mind wandered on these thoughts, my phone suddenly rang and I almost had a heart attack. It was an Uber notification saying that there was a new passenger to pick up on the way. That was weird considering it was already past 3 in the morning. But it didn't bother me. In fact, I was relieved to have more people in the car. Leaving with the weird guy behind me, we finally arrived at the new passenger's location. She was a girl and she was standing under a streetlight, so she was easy to find, which was a relief compared to last time. The girl was dressed warmly, and it was clear that she had been waiting for a while. However, something in her gaze made me frown. She seemed a little scared, as if something wasn't right. Just then, I felt the atmosphere becoming heavier, and I didn't like the feeling at all. When the girl approached the car, I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. Normally, I would have told them to get in the back, but with the strange guy there, I preferred that she sat in the passenger seat. She opened the door quickly and got in with a faint hello that was lost in the cold night. Her eyes were frozen, as if she had seen a ghost. She smiled as she got in, but her gaze was still fixed on the front, so I decided not to ask her any questions. As I drove her to her destination, I noticed that the address coincided with that of the couple I had dropped off earlier, and this made my curiosity increase, but also my nerves. I looked at the girl next to me and asked her if she knew the guy behind me, and her reaction made me even more uneasy. First, she looked at the guy, and then she smiled at me and said confidently, "Yes." I found it hard to swallow, as if a lump had formed in my throat. That night, she didn't feel well. It was as if the atmosphere was charged with tension. It was clear that something was going on here, but I already knew that I couldn't do anything about it, so I tried to calm down. I just had to take them home, and I could go to sleep in peace. We had a few minutes to go and it would all be over. However, when we arrived at the address, I noticed that all the lights were off. The guy went out first and started walking towards the house. Then the girl stopped to close the door, and before leaving, she turned her head and said to me, "Just wait a minute, we forgot something, we'll be right back." She smiled, and I don't know why, but her expression gave me a strange feeling in my stomach. Sure, go ahead," I replied, feeling a little stupid for having said it. Then the door slammed shut behind her and everything went silent. Then I stood there, looking at the darkness, wondering if I should leave. But before I could make up my mind, suddenly, I felt a blow on the passenger window. I voted with my heart racing, and then the girl appeared again, but now her face was pale. "Please hurry. My friend needs help," she said urgently. I didn't know what to think, but something in her tone made me feel very scared. Well, she was scared, so I guess it was only natural that I should be too. "There's blood," she said, almost shouting. "We need to take her to the hospital," she added. And that was enough to send a wave of panic surging through my chest. Without thinking, I turned off the engine and got out of the car, following the girl. But as we approached the front door, I stopped dead in my tracks. Before I could run away, the door closed behind me, and when I turned around, I saw the guy with a bloody knife in his hand. "Oh no," I thought as terror took hold of me. Then the girl slowly turned towards me, laughing in a way that made my blood run cold. "Run," she said. After that, everything turned to chaos. I ran quickly towards the door, but it was too late. The guy pushed me to the ground with force and I fell with a thud. My mind couldn't assimilate what was happening, and even less why. I tried to scream, but I was paralyzed with terror. I could no longer see the girl, and I could feel her laughter echoing in my head. As I crawled on the floor trying to escape, my hands and knees became soaked in the blood that covered the floor. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Sitting right on the dining room table with their throats cut were the couple I had left at the bar earlier. The scene was horrible and totally terrifying. I tried to scream, but the words got stuck in my throat. Then the guy appeared behind me, and, in a survival impulse, I jumped up and stood on my feet, just in time to dodge the knife he threw at me. In that instant, I looked back and saw him slip in the couple's blood. It was my only chance, so I ran towards the stairs, screaming without looking back and shouting for help, feeling the cold sweat running down my back. The voice of the girl behind me was laughing again, but this time it seemed to be coming from somewhere deeper in the house. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a door that was ajar. It was my only option, so I jumped inside and hid in a closet, trying to stay calm as tears streamed down my cheeks, and the blood of the others soaked me. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the stairs became very audible. Each blow echoed in my chest, as I silently begged for him not to find me. But just when I thought I was lost, police sirens blared in the distance and I knew there was hope. At that moment, I heard the footsteps running down, and then, after making sure the coast was clear, I finally came out of the closet. I fell to my knees praying that the police would arrive in time to catch the psychopaths, but unfortunately they managed to escape before the police broke into the house. But at least I was safe. I was the survivor of the worst Uber trip ever. The pair of psychopaths were finally captured just 7 months later and sentenced to death, but not before murdering 4 other people. After that night, it all started with alcohol. Every Saturday, I would wander the city streets, pouring bottles down my throat until my liver said enough. Then I would take a cab home, and the poor driver would have to put up with my complaints and my chatter, which must have sounded unbearable. But there was one night in particular that stuck with me. That night I met up with some work colleagues at a local bar, drinking wine like there was no tomorrow. The warmth of the alcohol made me feel comfortably drunk, so I decided to go out onto the pavement and hail a cab to take me home. But no matter how many taxis I called, they were all busy, or they simply turned me away. That's when I remembered that there was a new car service that my friend Kaylee had mentioned a few nights before. So with a little resistance, I downloaded the app, and it didn't take long before I found myself accepting the terms and conditions. Finally, the screen of my phone lit up, and I saw that a certain Tom was on his way to pick me up. The problem was that he had no reviews or ratings. I was new to all this. It made me want to have my doubts, but with so many drinks in the system, I didn't have many options, and if I didn't want to spend the night lying on the sidewalk at the mercy of whoever, I had to be patient. About 10 minutes later, a black Volvo pulled up in front of me, and honestly, I felt too dizzy. So while trying to stay on my feet, I approached the door, opened it, and got into the car. "Is this my Uber?" I muttered, trying to form coherent words. The driver said nothing. In fact, he seemed surprised that I got in, and although his reaction was strange, I didn't think much about it. After all, it wasn't the first time I had gotten into a car drunk. Once I closed the door and gave him my address, the car started moving and we headed towards what must have been my apartment. The truth is that at that moment, everything was silent, and I began to look at the shadows of the trees as we drove into the darkness. I didn't live far from the center, so taking those country roads seemed strange to me, but I didn't question it too much either. I was more worried about containing the urge to vomit than about the route we were taking. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Are we there yet?" I asked, my voice a little sharp. "I'm sorry, I'm really tired. Could we get home sometime tonight?" I tried to sound sarcastic, but the tiredness and the alcohol were trying my patience. I knew perfectly well that it shouldn't take that long to get home, unless Tom was taking a detour. The guy seemed annoyed by my question, and I started to get worried. Maybe I should try to give him a good tip to get me there faster, but then I took out my phone, intending to use Apple Pay, and something caught my attention. I noticed that I had several missed calls and messages from someone claiming to be the real Uber who would come for me. He said he was in a blue BMW and was wondering where I was, as I was in front of the bar and he couldn't see me anywhere. As I tried to connect the dots, a feeling of fear sparked in my mind. "What's going on?" I wondered, feeling uneasy. I tried to ask the driver if he knew anything about my location just to see how lost I was. Although he responded rudely, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was getting into trouble. With every passing second, sleep and alcohol took hold of me, and I began to realize that I had made a monumental mistake. The streetlights flickered as we accelerated along those lonely, dark roads. I felt trapped in a nightmare, and my mind began to race. "Are we there yet?" I asked again, more alarmed this time. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he stared straight ahead, as if he were in his own world. And there I was, my head full of confusion and fear. I knew I had to do something, but the alcohol was clouding my judgment. It was then that the car turned sharply, and all the trees around us seemed to turn darker. It was at that moment that something inside me clicked. I was on a journey that I didn't even recognize. None of this was normal, and when I realized that, every fiber of my being began to scream at me to escape. But what could I do? I was trapped, with a strange driver on an uncertain journey, and my heart was pounding. I knew the situation wasn't good, but I was too drunk to think clearly. Anxiety began to take hold of me as the car continued to move forward. We were crossing more isolated areas, and with every second that passed, the tension increased. This Tom didn't say a single word, while I felt increasingly anxious. This was no longer just a trip home. It was a struggle for survival, because it was clear that this guy had no good intentions. At that moment, I looked up and came face to face with the crazy eyes of a wrinkled guy with a chilling smile, as if he had come from the underworld. His smile was from ear to ear, and when he started to speak, my blood ran cold. "If you call anyone, I'll kill you both." That moment of anguish made me gasp, and I backed away in my seat. I tried to bang on the door, hoping that someone would come and see my desperation, but it was a waste of time. Looking through the window, I realized that I was in the middle of a dark and lonely country road. There wasn't a soul in sight. My breathing quickened, and fear gripped me as the guy started to speed up. "Yes, you're mine now, so let's have some fun," he said, waving a knife in his hand. However, just when I thought there was no way out, I saw a blue flash in the distance. It was a police car coming towards us, sirens wailing in the air, filling the silence of the forest. The guy got nervous and quickly hid the knife under the seat as the car came to a sudden stop. In an instant, 2 officers came running out, taser in hand, and pulled him out of the car like a rag doll. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't remember calling the police, so I was very confused. After handcuffing him and putting him in the back of the patrol car, an officer approached me. "Are you all right, miss?" The feeling of relief hit me like a truck, finally knocking down my fears. In that moment, all the tension I felt came flooding back, and I started to cry uncontrollably, seeing how close I had been to falling victim to a predator. I told the officers about the guy, the madness of that night, how the alcohol had clouded my judgment, and once I had calmed down a bit, I pointed to the hidden knife. The police officers informed me that they already knew where to find me before we got there, as the taxi app had tracking features that allowed drivers to see if passengers were taking a different route. So my real driver realized that I was going in the opposite direction to what I had entered and alerted the police immediately. They were chasing us because the madman had tried to take me somewhere scary deep in the woods. On the way home, I reflected on what had happened. If it hadn't been for the real Tom, I probably would have been in serious danger. Since that night, I have tried to stay sober and alert, but the image of that twisted smile still haunts me. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror of my own car, I see it reflected with that dark look as if it were waiting for a moment to return. I never thought that a night out drinking could take me to such a terrifying place. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still feel the pulse of that terror stalking me. Hi, I'm Mark. I've been driving for Uber for a few years now, but before that I spent over 25 years as a truck driver. I've seen and experienced a lot of weird things on the road, but nothing compares to what happened to me one night. And believe me, I'm not easily impressed. It all started on a normal night. You may not know this, but Uber drivers don't just drive people. Sometimes we also transport objects. That night I was doing a couple of short trips when I received a notification on the app. I had to pick up a small box. The customer, whose name was Peter, told me to take it to his girlfriend who worked in a 24-hour veterinary clinic. It's not often that I receive this type of order, but I decided to take the opportunity. It's not like they pay better, but after so many years on the road, I sometimes miss the solitude of long journeys. Finally, I arrived at the meeting point where the client would meet me. It was an old, rundown apartment in a suburb to the north of the city. The neighborhood seemed quiet, so I wasn't too nervous waiting for Peter, although the place gave me a bit of a bad vibe. While I was waiting, I took another look at the information and remembered that I had to go to the vet and ask for Haley, and that the box was a surprise for her. But then I had a doubt. If it was a surprise, why didn't he deliver it himself, instead of sending it by Uber? I kept thinking about it, but time was passing and Peter didn't show up. Suddenly I saw a guy peeking through the apartment doors. I waved at him and looked again at my application to remember Peter's name, but at that moment he appeared out of nowhere, right next to me. "It's Peter, isn't it?" I asked. "Sorry, I'm late," he said. He had a very friendly attitude and a smile that honestly made me feel uncomfortable, as if he were trying to force it. There was something strange about him. He didn't seem dangerous, but he had that vibe that lets you know something's not right. "Sorry, is everything okay?" I asked him. He smiled and said, Yes, totally fine. You need to take this box to the vet, right? If Helen asks anything weird, just tell her I'm the one who sent it." He gave me his description, and despite how strange it was, I decided to go ahead. His tone was strange, but I didn't want to get into trouble. "Make sure she believes me," he added. By the time I looked again, Peter had vanished, his door still closed. With no elevator nearby and no one around, I felt pretty weird. Anxious to get out of there, I drove a few blocks to the vet. When I arrived, the place seemed low-key. There wasn't much activity for a 24-hour vet, but I didn't think much of it. I just asked for Haley, and when I saw her come out, she looked at me curiously. Then I handed her the box, and what happened next left me very puzzled. She took it, and on hearing Peter's name, her eyes widened, and suddenly she started crying and ran away. Before I could understand what was happening, another vet employee came over and started shouting at me. "Get out of here," he said furiously, hurling a string of insults at me. I wanted to explain that I was only there to deliver the box, but there was no way. I knew it was a bad time to talk. Just as I was about to give him a bad rating for the race and leave a complaint on the app, I heard a knock on the window. It was Haley, who was still crying, but she decided to come over to my car, looked at me with distress, and asked, "Are you sure Peter gave you that box?" I immediately sensed that something wasn't right. Why was Haley so worried? I began to understand that perhaps there was something darker behind that surprise that Peter had sent her. Suddenly, the whole scenario began to feel like a trap to me, and uneasiness crept in again, questioning whether I had done the right thing by getting involved in all this. The situation became even more disturbing when Haley took out her phone and showed me a photo. In the picture were she and Peter, kissing, and without a doubt, it was the same guy who had given me the box. But there was a problem. According to what she told me, Peter had disappeared more than 2 months ago. "I don't know, this sounds a little weird," I replied. "I don't think a guy who's missing would send a box instead of just coming to see you." Haley asked me if I had been paid for the trip, and I said yes. "He did it," I told her. As we talked, we touched the box and she decided to open it, and surprise, it was a cell phone. When I turned it on, I saw a picture of Peter riding a bicycle. This was already getting crazy. "Hey, can you give me a ride? I'll pay you for the last trip in this one," she asked. But I told her that honestly I couldn't help her. I had a minimum number of trips to complete with Uber. "It's okay, I understand," she replied. She looked disappointed, but I couldn't get too involved in this, especially because of how weird it all seemed. She just nodded and left with her cell phone in her hand. I was about to accept another trip when my phone rang again. I looked closer and saw that it was Haley again. "Okay, let's see what happens," I thought. After accepting, the vet's door opened again, and Haley came out wearing overalls. "Let me tell you what happened," she began. Helen explained to me that everything was going well with Peter until suddenly, one day he simply left and didn't come back. She told me how, after his disappearance, strange things started to happen in their house. Objects moving on their own, her room feeling colder, and sometimes she had the feeling that she was being watched. She told me that once she woke up in the middle of the night because of a knock on the door, and when she looked, she saw Peter standing there as usual. So she opened the door excitedly, but there was no one there. "So you're saying that Peter is dead?" I asked her. She nodded with a sad face. "I don't know how to handle this. I thought maybe he gave you the box because he thought it might have a connection to you. But why me? What do I have to do with all this?" I replied. "Maybe you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time," said Haley with a resigned tone. That left a bad taste in my mouth, and as we pondered, Haley looked at her phone and suddenly asked me to stop the car. I did, and she quickly got out. Then she ran down an empty dirt road. I was worried to see her, but before I could follow her, I saw her digging in the ground, so I approached, and after a few minutes of digging desperately, she found something. I was frozen when I saw it. It was Peter's body. It was already decomposing, and the whole scene was too chilling. Suddenly, Haley tried to hug him, but I quickly stopped her. "This is a crime scene. You can't touch him," I said. Then we called the police, and once they arrived, the case was declared a homicide. They had new leads now. They checked the cameras and started questioning the neighbors. A few days later, they were able to reconstruct the night of his disappearance, where Peter was seen being dragged away by two guys. You could tell he was terrified, clearly forced to go with them. According to Haley, they managed to find these men, but they both had different stories about what happened. One of them finally spoke up and confessed that initially they had tried to rob him, but things had got out of control and they had ended up beating him to death. From that moment on, Helen and I became good friends. It turns out that she was also from the same neighborhood. Over time, she managed to rebuild her life, although she still mourned Peter. However, she knew that he was in a better place and that at least she had answers. One day, as I was finishing another trip to the area near the apartment where I had received the box, I looked towards the place, and to my surprise, I saw Peter again, staring out of the window. With his head bowed and a smile on his face, I felt like he was thanking me in silence, and a feeling of peace came over me. Despite everything terrible that had happened, at least there was some kind of closure. We all have that impulse to be kind, right? That typical phrase of "if you need anything, just let me know," which we say without really thinking about it. But let me share an experience I had a couple of years ago, and I'm warning you, be careful who you decide to be kind to. It was a Sunday afternoon. I have my own business, so I usually work on weekends, which can be exhausting. But in the long run, it has allowed me to live quite well. I'm not saying I'm rich, but I have enough not to worry. And well, back to the story. That Sunday, I had just finished a project for a client and needed a break. So it occurred to me that a walk in Central Park would do me good. But since I lived far away, I opted to call an Uber instead of using my car. The app promised that the car would arrive in minutes, so I grabbed my things and went down to the front of my building. I noticed that the street was surprisingly busy for a Sunday. New York never sleeps, you know what they say. When my Uber arrived, I got in, but I was in for a surprise. The driver was Candy, a woman in her 40s with beautiful hair and a smile that would light up your day. Once I got in, we started chatting. She said she had recently started driving for Uber. She came from another city and had moved to New York with big dreams in mind. She told me that she had always wanted to be in show business, but as often happens, life had other plans. Because there was traffic, we had the opportunity to talk more than usual. Candy told me that she was a single mother of two girls, one 10 and the other 12, who loved to read and draw. She showed me photos of them, and I noticed that they looked more like their dad, which I mentioned without thinking. But Candy's reaction was quite strange. She was silent for a few seconds, and the atmosphere became tense, so I got worried. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked her, with concern on my face. "No, don't worry," she said. "I get a little emotional when someone mentions their dad." That's when she dropped the bombshell on me. Her husband had died in a car accident just after the birth of their second daughter. He was a firefighter and she was devastated. She showed me a photo of them together, and you could tell they were the typical, perfect family, like something out of a movie. Since her husband's death, Candy had faced many difficulties in keeping her daughters in school and providing for their day-to-day needs. As she told me all this, my heart sank. It was a really sad story. I learned that she had had several jobs. She had been a waitress and had also worked part-time as a telephone operator. Despite her efforts, it was clear how hard it was for her to make sure her daughters had the essentials. Finally, we arrived at my destination. But before getting out, I was so moved by her story that, in addition to paying for the trip, I decided to give Candy an extra $300. When she saw the money, the expression on her face went from disbelief to emotion. "I can't believe it, thank you. This means a lot to me," she said with tears in her eyes. In that moment, I knew I had made the right decision to be kind to her. Sometimes a small action can make a difference in someone's life. But nevertheless, what came next left me thinking about how unexpected helping others can be. Although at that moment, everything seemed fine, nothing would be the same again. I felt a little uncomfortable and told Candy that I didn't want her to think I was giving her the money out of pity. I only did it because I understand what it's like to struggle, and I thought it might help you a little, I clarified, smiling at her. She accepted the money, and tears almost came to her eyes, and before I got out of the car, I gave her my card in case she needed anything. I told her I would always be just a text message away. Then I said goodbye and headed to the park, while she walked away quickly. A couple of weeks passed, and frankly, I forgot about the experience. One normal night after an exhausting day at work, I was on my sofa watching a couple of series when suddenly, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number, and when I opened it, the phrase that I saw made me feel a little uneasy. "Do you think you're better than me?" I had no idea what that meant or who had sent it, so I replied, "I think you have the wrong number." Then I put my phone to one side, but a few minutes later another message arrived, this one even stranger. "You don't know who I am, but here you are sitting on your sofa not thinking about us poor people. You should be ashamed of yourself." Now I was really confused, but I decided that instead of replying again, it would be best to call the number.
"Hello?" answered a voice in a very agitated tone. "It's your fault. How can I live like this? I can't support my children and you think your stupid $300 will change anything. I'm here with a rope around my neck. This is over." Her words made my blood run cold. I knew I had heard that voice somewhere before, so I stood there frozen for a moment trying to process what I was hearing. "Candy?" I managed to ask. "Yes, you're surprised that you remember me," she replied almost ironically. I told her not to do anything stupid and to give me her address, that I would go and help her right away. "Things aren't that bad," I told her. She gave me an address, and in 20 minutes I arrived, although it seemed like an eternity to me thinking about her and her 2 daughters about to do something desperate. When I arrived, I entered the apartment without knocking. "Candy, are you there?" I shouted as I walked in, and she answered me from the kitchen, but everything was dark, and only a couple of candles lit up the place. "What's going on, Candy?" I asked her, and she smiled. "Dinner's ready." The truth was that her mood and the scene did not seem like someone in danger. Then I turned on the lights and saw that the place wasn't as bad as I thought. "What are you doing?" I asked her, confused. "I made dinner. Come and sit down," she said, as if everything were perfectly normal. I asked her about her daughters, and her laugh made my hair stand on end. "I don't have any daughters. Where did you get that idea?" she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Where are you going with this, Candy?" I asked, increasingly alarmed. "I've researched you. You're rich but alone, and I'm the perfect girl for you. What good is all that money if you have no one to share it with?" I found this all extremely creepy. Wow, it seems like she really wasn't that needy, she's just crazy, I thought to myself. I tried to act normal, so I made up an excuse to quickly leave through the door. Fortunately, she didn't do anything weird and let me leave. Once I set foot outside her apartment, I blocked her number on my phone. Over the next few weeks, I kept receiving messages and calls from different numbers with no sign of her stopping, so I was eventually forced to change my number. Just imagine how annoying it was to have to inform my friends, family, and clients about my new number. I learned the hard way that there are a lot of weirdos out there, and it's best to be cautious. It's not that it's wrong to help others if it comes from the heart, but you have to be very careful about giving your number to someone, no matter how harmless they may seem. As you can see, I had to learn this lesson the hard way.